My world was steam and dirty plates until a panicked millionaire, fleeing his formidable mother, demanded I pretend to be his fiancée. He offered me a fortune, but the price was far higher than I could ever imagine. The smell of rejection is a mix of stale wine and industrial-grade bleach. I should know. I've been breathing it in for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, for the past 2 years. My kingdom is a 3-by-3-foot space of scalding steam, clattering plates, and the ghosts of $1,000 meals. I'm the dishwasher at L'Etoile, a place where people spend more on an appetizer than I make in a week. They sit on the other side of the swinging door, draped in silk and smelling of money, while I stand here, in a hairnet and stained apron, scrubbing foie gras residue off fine china. Tonight was different, though. There was a current of electricity in the air, a frantic energy that even seeped back into the kitchen. Chef Dubois was practically vibrating with stress, screaming at the line cooks in a furious mix of French and English. The source of the chaos was a single table. Table 7, the big corner booth. The guest was a Mr. Sterling, a tech millionaire or something. A regular, but tonight he was apparently on edge, sending things back, making impossible demands. We could hear his raised voice occasionally, a low, angry rumble that made the servers flinch. I was in my zone, the rhythm of spray, scrub, and stack my only reality, when the kitchen door flew open with a bang that silenced the entire kitchen. It wasn't a server, it was him, Mr. Sterling, in the flesh. He looked like a man being hunted. His Tom Ford suit was impeccable, but his tie was loosened. His normally perfect dark hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wide with a primal terror I'd only ever seen in nature documentaries. Chef Dubois stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "Monsieur Sterling, is there a problem? The kitchen is for staff." But Sterling didn't even see him. His frantic gaze swept over the stainless steel landscape, past the sauté station, over the pastry chef dusting a dessert with powdered sugar, and landed impossibly on me, on the dishwasher, hidden in the steamy corner. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying. He strode past the chef, ignoring the protests, his expensive leather shoes squeaking on the greasy floor. Before I could process what was happening, he was in front of me, caging me in against the industrial sink. The smell of his cologne sandalwood and panic was overwhelming. "You," he breathed, his voice a raw whisper. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. My skin was damp from the steam, and his fingers felt like a brand. I flinched, a small gasp escaping my lips. "I need your help," he said, his eyes pleading. They were a startling shade of blue, now swimming with desperation. "Please, I'll pay you. I'll pay you anything." The entire kitchen staff was frozen, watching this bizarre drama unfold. I could only stare at him, my mind a blank slate of confusion and fear. "Help with—" "With what?" I managed to stammer out. My voice sounded small and stupid. "I need you to be someone," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Just for an hour, maybe 2. I need you to be my fiancé." I blinked. The steam from the machine billowed around us, making the moment feel even more surreal. You're what?" I thought I must have misheard him. Maybe the heat was getting to me. "My fiancée," he repeated, his voice cracking. "She's out there, my mother. She just flew in, unannounced. She doesn't approve of my lifestyle. She wants me to settle down with some socialite she's picked out. I told her I was already engaged to someone real, someone grounded. Not from her world." His eyes scanned my worn-out sneakers, my faded apron, the redness of my dishpan hands. "You're perfect." I started to laugh. It was a hysterical, choked sound. "Mister, you're crazy. I'm a dishwasher." "I'll give you $100,000, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly serious whisper. "Cash. Tonight." Just walk out there, sit with us, smile, agree with everything I say, and let me get her back on a plane. Please. You have no idea what's at stake. $100,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering like a heat haze. It was a fantasy number. It was my student loans paid off. It was a down payment on a small apartment. It was a life I couldn't even properly imagine, offered to me by a madman in $1,000 suit. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. My brain was screaming no, but a tiny, treacherous voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if?" Before I could form a response, before I could even shake my head and tell him to get the hell out of my corner, the swinging door to the dining room burst open again. A woman stood there, silhouetted against the soft light of the restaurant. She was tall, impossibly elegant in a severe charcoal dress, her silver hair styled in a perfect, icy chignon. Her face was a mask of cold fury, her eyes sharp as shards of glass as they fixed on her son. Mr. Sterling froze, his hand tightening on my arm until it hurt. The woman's gaze shifted from him, down to his hand clutching me, and then to my face. Her lip curled in an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, as if she were looking at something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Harrison," she said, her voice like the crack of a whip in the silent kitchen. "What is the meaning of this? Who is this?" The moment stretched into an eternity. Mr. Sterling took a shaky breath, his back straightening as if by sheer force of will. He turned his head slightly, his terrified blue eyes meeting mine for a split second, a silent, desperate plea passing between us. Then he turned back to the dragon at the door and gave her a wobbly, unconvincing smile. "Darling," he stammered, his grip a vice on my arm, "I'd like you to meet my mother. Mother, this is my fiancée." The words hung in the steamy air, thick and unbelievable. My fiancée. He said it with the conviction of a man jumping off a cliff, hoping wings would sprout on the way down. The dragon lady, his mother, didn't move. Her eyes, the color of a frozen lake, narrowed as they raked over me, from my scuffed non-slip shoes to the frayed collar of my uniform shirt, to the damning hairnet still clinging to my head. I was a bug under her microscope, and she was not impressed. Chef Dubois looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. My co-workers had melted into the stainless steel background, trying to become invisible. My entire world had shrunk to the crushing grip of Harrison Sterling's hand on my arm and the withering glare of his mother. "Harrison, have you lost your mind?" she finally said, her voice dangerously low. "Not at all," he chirped, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He tugged my arm, pulling me away from the sanctuary of my dish pit. "Clara was just helping out in the back. A friend of the chef's, you know how it is. We were just about to join you. Clara." He gave me a name. It sounded foreign in my own head. My name is Maya, but in this bizarre high-stakes play, I was now Clara. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling like overcooked noodles. He hustled me through a side door into a narrow, dimly lit service corridor. The moment the door swung shut, he let go of my arm and spun to face me, pressing his hands against the wall on either side of my head. He was breathing hard, his panic a tangible thing between us. Okay. Listen," he whispered urgently. "Her name is Eleanor. Don't call her that unless she insists. Just be polite, be quiet. Let me do the talking. We met 3 months ago. You're a freelance artist. Pottery. Yes, that's good. That explains the hands." He glanced down at my red, chapped knuckles, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He reached up and clumsily pulled the hairnet from my head, my messy ponytail tumbling free. "Just nod and smile. Can you do that? $100,000 to just nod and smile." I stared at him, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "She's going to eat me alive," I whispered, the words barely audible. She looked at me like I was a piece of gum on her heel. She looks at everyone like that, he said, trying for a reassuring smile that didn't reach his terrified eyes. It's her default setting. Please. Just for a little while. I'm begging you. Before I could answer, he took my hand and led me back out, not into the kitchen, but through another door that opened directly into the hushed, carpeted opulence of the main dining room. The shift was dizzying. The clatter and steam of the kitchen vanished, replaced by the soft murmur of conversations, the gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain, and the low strains of a string quartet. Every head seemed to turn as Harrison Sterling, the tech mogul, walked through the restaurant holding hands with the dishwasher. I could feel their eyes on my cheap uniform, my flushed face. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. He led me to table 7. It was a plush, secluded booth, set with a dizzying array of crystal glasses and polished silver. And there she was, Eleanor Sterling, sitting upright like a queen on her throne. She hadn't moved, but a waiter was now pouring her a glass of wine with a trembling hand. "There you are," she said, her tone laced with ice. "Do sit down, Clara." She said my new name as if it were a particularly nasty swear word. I slid into the booth opposite her, the leather sighing under my weight. Harrison sat beside me, his thigh pressing against mine, a desperate, grounding pressure. He flagged down a waiter. "A bottle of the 98 Lafite, please. We're celebrating." Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Celebrating what precisely? Your sudden interest in the culinary arts support staff?" "Celebrating us," Harrison said, placing his hand over mine on the table. It was an act of pure theater, but his skin was cold and clammy. "I was going to tell you in a more appropriate setting, but you surprised me, Mother." I focused on a spot on the white tablecloth, trying to control my breathing. $100,000. $100,000. The number became a mantra, a shield against the sheer, overwhelming insanity of it all. I could do this. I could be quiet. I could nod and smile. Eleanor took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, her frozen eyes never leaving my face. She was dissecting me, searching for the weakness in his story, and she knew she didn't have to look far. She set the glass down with a soft click. "An artist, you say?" she mused, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. "How charmingly bohemian. It must be a passionate and whirlwind romance. I imagine the proposal was something quite unforgettable." Harrison stiffened beside me. "It was, very special," he managed. "I'm sure it was," she purred, leaning forward slightly. The predatory smile widened, showing a line of perfect white teeth. Her gaze locked onto mine, pinning me to the leather seat. I felt like a rabbit caught in the headlights of a Rolls-Royce. "So tell me, Clara dear, I'm absolutely dying to know all the romantic details. Where exactly did my son propose to you?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. Harrison's hand tightened on mine, a silent, frantic signal of distress. My mind was a roaring, empty cavern. Propose? This guy had grabbed me from my dish pit not 20 minutes ago. The most romantic thing that had happened to me all year was finding an undamaged fork in the garbage disposal. I opened my mouth, a squeak of pure panic my only planned response. But then I looked at Eleanor Sterling. I saw the triumphant gleam in her icy eyes, the way she was savoring this moment, ready to pounce on our inevitable failure. And something inside me, something I didn't even know was there, snapped. It was the same stubborn grit that got me through 10-hour shifts on my feet, the same weary defiance that made me scrub burnt cheese off a pan until my knuckles bled. I was tired of being looked down on. I was tired of feeling small. Taking a slow breath, I met her gaze head on. "It was in the rain," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "On the Brooklyn Bridge. It was late after a storm had just passed and the whole city was glittering. No one else was around. It was just us. Harrison's head whipped around to look at me, his eyes wide with shock. Eleanor's cruel smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He didn't have a ring, I continued, the story spooling out of me as if I'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. He said he wanted me to choose it with him, that he wanted it to be a symbol of us, not just something he bought. So instead, he took a piece of string from his coat pocket and tied it around my finger. I held up my left hand. My fingers were bare, red, and calloused. He said it was a placeholder for forever. Silence. The string quartet seemed to swell in the background. Harrison was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, a strange mix of awe and utter confusion on his face. Eleanor's expression was unreadable. She took another slow sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. "How poetic," she finally said, though the words were brittle. The rest of the dinner was a tightrope walk over a canyon. Eleanor peppered me with questions, each one a cleverly disguised trap. Where did I go to art school? A community college on Long Island, plausible enough. Where did I live? A tiny studio in Bushwick, very bohemian. She tried to trip me up on art history, on high society etiquette, on 1,000 little details meant to expose me as a fraud. But with every question, a strange confidence grew inside me. I wasn't trying to be one of her people. I was Clara, the grounded, real artist. I described my imaginary pottery studio, the feel of clay under my hands, the quiet joy of creation. I spoke from the heart of a life I'd always secretly wanted, and somehow it was believable because a part of me wished it were true. Harrison, meanwhile, seemed to be holding his breath. He followed my lead, adding small details, backing up my invented memories, playing the part of the doting, love-struck fiancé, with a surprising amount of skill. By the time the espresso arrived, the tension had subtly shifted. Eleanor wasn't looking at me with disgust anymore. It was something closer to grudging bewilderment. Finally, she placed her napkin on the table. "Well," she announced, "it has been an illuminating evening." She stood, her posture regal. "Harrison, walk me to my car." It was a command, not a request. He stood, gave my hand a quick, grateful squeeze under the table, and followed her out. I was left alone in the booth, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving me shaky and exhausted. The $100,000 felt like a distant dream again. What if he just left, drove off with his mother, and never came back? 10 minutes later, he slid back into the booth. He looked dazed, like a man who had just survived a shipwreck. "She's gone," he said, slumping against the leather. She actually bought it. She told me you have a surprising amount of substance and that I could do worse. From her, that's practically a gushing endorsement." He let out a long, shaky breath and then turned to me, his blue eyes clear and direct for the first time all night. "You were incredible. The Brooklyn Bridge? The string? Where did that come from?" I shrugged, a small smile touching my lips. "I watch a lot of movies." He laughed, a genuine, relieved sound. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. He quickly wrote something, tore it out, and slid it across the table. I looked down. It was a check made out to Maya Garcia for $200,000. My eyes shot up to his. This is too much." "It's not enough," he said quietly. "You didn't just save me from an awkward dinner. You saved my company." She was threatening to pull her funding, to use her seat on the board to force me out if I didn't get my life in order. "You didn't just play a role, you gave me a lifeline." He hesitated, looking down at my hands on the table. "And for what it's worth, I think I liked Clara a lot." I stared at the check, at the impossible number of zeros. It was real. This was happening. It was the end of scrubbing foie gras off plates. It was the beginning of anything I wanted. I looked back at him, at the exhausted millionaire who had burst into my life in a storm of panic. "Thank you, Harrison," I said, my voice thick with emotion. He smiled. A real smile this time. "No. Thank you, Clara." He stood up, ready to leave. "If you ever decide to actually take up pottery," he added, a twinkle in his eye, "I'd like to be your first customer." And then he was gone. I sat there for a moment longer, in the plush booth of the fancy restaurant. No longer a dishwasher, not quite an artist, but someone holding a check that represented a new beginning. I carefully folded it, tucked it into my apron pocket, and walked out of L'Etoile for the last time, stepping out into the cool night air. The whole glittering city spread out before me, feeling for the first time like it might actually belong to me too.